Those first few minutes or first few hours after you read a good book, it's pretty magical. And I started a project to read a book of every country. And the country that I read this week was Spain. And the name of the book was The Shadow of the Wind. Sorry for those purists, but I am reading on a Kindle. I don't have the paper copy, especially because there's almost 200 countries out there, and I wasn't gonna buy 200 paper books. So basically, I'm starting from the books that I can find easier, or depending on the price of the book, and so it's not really in a particular order. I read Spain. So the idea of this project is basically I want to read something from every country, and the only rule is basically that the author has to have been born in that country or have worked in that country. So I found many authors that write about a specific country, or that their stories uses a country or a city as a background, but they are not actually from there. So I'm going to skip those, even though those are great books. The other thing that I'm doing is I found a lot of literary books that are seen by scholars as great books. For one example is a book by Machado de Assis when I started researching Brazil, and I didn't really get into the book. It wasn't really for me, so I'm looking for books that are popular, books that a lot of people like and the reviews are good and has a nice story to it. And plus would be if uses the country or the city as a character, as a background. For example, the Shadow of the Wind uses Barcelona as a character, uses the Civil War as part of its plot. So I'm going to start talking about the book in general, and as I get into the video more and more, I will have some spoilers, but I will let you know before I get there. So the book in general, my first feeling is, wow, it is a long book and it is a fascinating story. But there are pieces that I didn't particularly like. Usually every book that I read, there is the excitement of the beginning, there is the climax at the end, and the closing of the story. Those are the main things, but then every book has its muddy middle, which is the boring part of the book. This one explores it a little different because it's telling not one story but two parallel stories. So the way that the book starts is with something called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is a sad but inspiring place. It's basically a book, a place not where the books go to die, but at the books go to be saved. So I wouldn't call it a cemetery, but that's what Carlos Ruiz Zafón, the author of The Shadow of the Wind, calls it in his book, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. But it's more like a vault. It's a place that protects the book. And I started getting fascinated by that idea, which is basically a place that you can go and books are saved from being lost, from being forgotten. But in reality, the books that are already forgotten are the ones that go there. So yes, it is something interesting. And the Cemetery of Forgotten Books is a character, is a part of the story. Now let's talk about one of the little things that I didn't like, at least in my opinion. You may have a different one when you read it. The cemetery is not a huge part of the plot itself, even though it's a character. Even though throughout the story, it is made reference back to it, but it's not described in infinite detail, so I couldn't really create an image in my head that I kept throughout the book, like I did of other parts of the plot or the scenery or the places where the main character goes to then. Um, the post-Civil War atmosphere, it's really daunting. It's a sad part of this plot, but it got me interested in learning more about it. And is it something that really happened in Spain? Yes, I think so. I will, of course, look more into it, but it's not really defined a pros or cons of it. It does not really define a side or what the reason was for it. It's just that the Civil War is happening on the background of that story, at least of one of the stories. So that's where you're going to encounter later when I start giving you a little bit of spoilers. I will talk a little more in depth about that, but it's basically, it is part of a background of one of the stories. The two stories are parallel. If you read, there are some books, Cloud Atlas, for example, which I don't have it in here, but it's basically a book that jumps around between several stories and you have to keep up with them as the plot progresses. The Shadow of the Wind is not like that. Both stories are interconnected from beginning to end. They're both interconnected. And I really enjoy the way that he entangled both stories. Now let's talk about what I didn't like about that part is he kind of not only made a parallel, but both stories are very, very similar, even though they're dealing with different characters, with different eras, with different years. The story itself repeats between the two stories. And even though they are entangled, he, spoiler alert, does not really unentangle them, if that's a word, in the end of the book, if you know what I mean. He doesn't really get to a point where, oh, this is why the two stories were the same. There is some allusion to that. I love the way that he ended the book as well, because I love books that end, spoiler alert, with a nice happy ending, a nice closure to things. But it's still, I did not get the part where you tell me why those two stories were the same. So I'm going to be doing this for basically every book that I read from every country, because I want to learn more about that country and about the way that they write. But here's something now that I already started, that I didn't anticipated when I created this project, is learning about society at that time period when the book was, not when the books was written, but when the book story or the plot happens. And I have a list of things that I wrote down as I'm reading, and misogyny, it's a huge part. Patriarchal society, it's a huge part. Homophobia and the treatments of LGBTQ plus people during that period of time. The author does not write any judgment either way, but he tells the story through the lenses of one of the characters being LGBTQ, and then later in the book there's another character that is just accused by the police because they are LGBTQ, and the way that the society handles is, no, it's a crime, you're gonna get arrested and beaten up and you're gonna lose your job. So that's basically what happened in one part. And then females, there is a domestic violence portion to it throughout the book. There is a clear notion of, and remember, this is not the author making a judgment or making a claim, it's just representing how society was structured at that period of time. And there are cases of infidelity, there are cases of domestic violence that are prevalent in the book. There are the angry, controlling husband and the submissive wife. It's there in that book. And that might be a part that for some of us might not be very nice to read about, but if you are reading from a period of time, I think it's important to acknowledge that, and the author does acknowledge it, but it's still a sad period in our history that you are reminded of as you are reading through it. So, what is the plot? Basically, there's this character called Daniel, or Daniel, and he starts the story as visiting this cemetery of forgotten books. He tells his father that he does not remember the face of his mother, which has passed away. And before you know that she has passed away, there is a very, very interesting scene where he asks, the father asks the son, Daniel, to keep it a secret, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, that he is not to tell absolutely anybody, which later in the book, spoiler alert, he brings a lot of people in there. He talks to a lot of people about it. So it didn't keep really as a secret, but in the beginning of the book, he asks, even from mommy or something on that sense, and the father says, no, of course not. We don't keep secrets from mommy. But at that moment, you don't really know that she's no longer with them. And then later on, you realize, oh yeah, that's right. He talks to her in prayers or in conversations at some point, but she's already passed. That starts the book with a pretty intense feeling for me, and it's that this little boy that doesn't have a mother, but he still crave a connection to her, but he forgot her face, and then the father says, don't worry, Danielle, I remember her for both of us. And that was really touching. I think that was a very powerful moment in the book for me, and it visits right in the beginning, like in the first few pages, if not in the first page. So the tone of the book for me was set right there, and I'm like, I already like this. I already like the way that he writes. So when I read War and Peace from Leo Tolstoy, he told me how Russian writers used to, or do still, I don't know, write books, which is very different than the way that American writers do. And with Carlos Ruiz Zafón, there is that sense of very Western type of writing, very kind of like emotional, and there's a plot that follows the story, and I really enjoy that because that's what I'm used to reading. Not that I didn't enjoy War and Peace, of course not. I loved it, and I will talk about it again when I get to read something from Russia. But I like the way that this author, at least, represents the story in his book. As the story progresses, he finds a book that calls to him, and he kind of make mention to the fact that the horse you don't choose the horse chooses you, kind of thing, for a book. So you don't go out, or you don't go in and choose a book, the book chooses you. And there's this book called The Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax, which is basically the name, the title of the book that you were reading. And I thought that was pretty cool because as he is reading through that book, the story of the book itself is not presented to you as much as the life of both characters. So now a few more spoilers. The two parallel stories is the life of Danielle, this little kid that found the book, and the author of the book, Julian Carax. Not the real author in real life, Carlos Ruiz Zafón, no, the author of the fictitious book in the story. So both of their lives are parallel. Both of their lives follow a very, very, very similar plot. They are found so their father has a little store, they don't do very well financially, then they find a wealthier patron of them that start helping them, and then they end up becoming in love, falling in love with the daughter of said patron. In the case of Daniel, it's not the daughter, is the niece, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Clara, which is a blind girl that talks to him about Julian Carax. And then later on in the story, another wealthy patron, which kind of mix the two stories, and now you see the parallel because they are the same story happening twice in several with several different characters, but the same exact way, where the forbidden love with this new wealthier, not the first one for Daniel, but still the same one for Julian. And I am jumping around here because it is a pretty complicated dynamic that they have. But the point is that Daniel makes the same exact mistakes that Julian does. Julian is the fictitious author of this forgotten book. Meanwhile, there's somebody going around and burning every copy of this book that they can find. And Daniel doesn't really understand why, and there is very powerful people that seems to want this story suppressed or gone, or there's something there. And you kind of like, as you're reading, you hang on to that not anxiety, but really that excitement, because it's like, well, what's going to happen? Why is this happening? Why is somebody trying to destroy all of the copies? And it has to be somebody that really, really hated this author. But as you progresses, the story unfolds, and there's so many people that really have a reason to dislike the author. And the way that the story progresses, you start thinking about different people. Who could it be? Kind of like a whodunit kind of thing. As the story progresses, there is a homeless person that starts to join Daniel in his endeavors and kind of investigating what happened to this author that nobody knows much about it, and not a lot of people have read this book or even heard about this author. And then there is a mystery about the backstory of this homeless person as well. And that's why the book is interesting, because it's so long, because it goes through the backstory of several different characters, which kind of makes the story even more interesting, because now you are thinking, okay, who is this guy, and is he part of the story with the original group and the author, and this, what's his play in it? And you realize later on that not really. His story is more entangled with the villain, which is a police officer, than with the author. And then the police officer, the villain, is also entangled with the author. So that's how their story intersect, is because the villain is have a past with both. So the villain is a POS, and because he goes through different eras, and when there's a war, he jumps sides. He is always if a new side won the war, then he jumps to the other side, and now he's kind of giving out the names of all of his allies, which used to be his allies before, and he's even going and making them disappear. And there's a lot of that. So that's another thing in the book. I don't want to say the word, but it's basically he makes people disappear a lot through the book, through different means, using his influence, his powers in his influence, because he is a police officer, and he does have connections and so on and so forth. As you learn more about the author as well, it becomes, the story starts in the middle, starts to become predictable, which a lot of books do, especially a book this length. They start becoming predictable. So for example, spoiler alert, There is one piece when um, there is one of the characters that is telling the story of the author to Danielle through a letter, because um, she also passed through the hands of the villain. Um, that you kind of like already start guessing what's happening and why. For example, big spoiler now because this is one of the twists. When the author and starts getting involved with the daughter of this wealthy man that brought him in and treat him as one of their own, part of the family, and he is caught in bed with the daughter. The father, this wealthy man, he goes crazy. He gets really angry and upset. But you got enough clue throughout that story that you were kind of like, I think I know what happened here. I think I know why he got so angry, and here's why. And that part I'm gonna leave it out because it was kind of like predictable, but it was still very interesting to get to that point because it's like it's that emotional shock, and now you feel a little bit of kind of like, oh wow, yeah, I knew that was coming, but that was intense. And as you go through the book again, the friendship is a big part of this book. The relationships that you make as a young pupil in school, and how you don't really keep them later on, or how they get destroyed because of decisions, because of forbidden love, because of a lot of stuff. So the relationship between Danielle, on that parallel, there's not a lot because Danielle doesn't have a lot of friends. He has one friend, and then he ends up in love with this friend's sister, and that's the plot on the Danielle side, which is similar to the author, which falls in love with his best friend's sister, which is the daughter of the wealthy man. But he loses all the other friends that he had. The school that he was going to was a private school paid by this wealthy man, and he gets kicked out after what happened. And of course, because the person paying for it and supporting him at that school was the wealthy man, of course. As it gets to the point of the book where the climax is going to happen, the villain continues to win, which is a normal thing in a lot of books, and I personally don't really care for that, but I understand as a plot it is necessary because otherwise books would become boring. And so they create this the author usually creates this idea that something needs to they need to take it away from the main character, from the good guy. Something needs to be, the stakes need to be raised, and the villain keep winning. And there are some books that I read in the past that I get to the end and it's like, wait, what happened? Why did the villain win? Why there was no consequences, right? So yeah, there's either a sequel or that's the way that the author decided to end the story. But in this book, it's not like that. It goes up, like the stakes keep going higher, and then you have the climax, and then you have the closing. So I really enjoy books like that, and I really like the way that he did it. So in the end, the fight scene, imagine as a movie, the fight scene will happen, and you already know that throughout the story. It's like this will happen between Danielle and the villain, or the author and the villain, because suddenly the author is still alive and they meet. Danielle and the author meet, and where they meet is the crossroads of that story, where one person destroyed their life and lost their loved ones and yada yada. The other person still have those things, and the author is trying to protect Danielle from, the author is Julian, is trying to protect Danielle from going through the same issues. And you get through the fight scene, and then you go to what happened after the fight scene, who stays, who is alive, and then those that who is alive closes a few loops that existed throughout the story, and that part I like. I really enjoy the way that he closed the story, and he didn't leave a lot of unanswered questions. There are a few, yes, but the major ones that he talked through the book, he remembered to go back and close it and close that loop, and he ends up that, yeah, the book ended well. The people that stayed alive are going to continue their lives, and then there's a hint of some people that you still don't know if they are alive or dead, and suddenly there is, in very end, like the last few sentences, it will tell you, oh, this happened, and then you are like, okay, so they are alive. Yeah, so this is my first book from this project, Reading the World, or Reading Around the World, or whatever I'm going to call it. The country of choice was Spain, and the book of choice was The Shadow of the Wind, by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. If I find the books in paper, I'll get it in paper. If I find it in Kindle, I'll get it in Kindle. If they have it on Audible, I'll get it on Audible or Libby, whatever I can find it. And I want to be able to read in the next few years at least one book from every country. If you have a recommendation for a country that I haven't read yet and you want to leave it down in the comments, please do so, because I'm still selecting which books I'm going to be reading next. Most likely I'm going to start back again in the list, and the next book that I already have is a book from Afghanistan, and it became very popular a few years ago, so I think it's not something too obscure. It's a popular book, and I will come back and talk about that one next. Thank you very much for watching.